Hello, everyone. My name is John Darlington. I'm an archaeologist, an author, and the Executive Director of World Monuments Fund Britain, and a person in need of a post-coronavirus haircut. I'm also delighted to welcome you to this special event organised in partnership with Intelligence Squared. Now, for those of you who don't know, World Monuments Fund is a charity which champions the conservation of exceptional works of architecture and monuments for people. It could be any type of building, a church, a power station, a sculpture, or an ancient rock carving, a cultural landscape, or a historic garden. But you can guarantee it will be special. We work with partners and local communities to ensure that endangered sites in their care have a long-term future. Our contribution may include funding, but it's just as likely to be in the form of advice on conservation management, on capacity building, advocacy, or on helping with educational or interpretive initiatives. Part of the World Monuments Fund mission is to engage people in heritage and to tell the story of places which have been shaped by history, why they're relevant today, and indeed their importance for the future. And today we're inviting you to go behind the scenes and discover the secrets of period dramas and the historic houses that help to bring them to life. I'm therefore absolutely delighted to have with me three wonderful panelists who have extensive experience working on period dramas. Firstly, joining us from not very far away from me in England is Nell Hudson, who's an English actress best known for her roles as Leary Mackenzie in the television drama Outlander and Nancy Skerritt in the period drama Victoria. Welcome, Nell.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to everyone for coming. Hello.
And all the way from Los Angeles, we have Julie Ann Robinson. And Julie Ann is a Golden Globe and BAFTA nominated television and film director who recently directed and produced the hit Netflix series Bridgerton. Hello, Julie.
Hi, it's great to be here.
And lastly, but by no means least, joining us from the beautiful county of Derbyshire in England is Sally Ambrose. And Sally is the head of marketing and visitor experience at Chatsworth, which has played host to a wide variety of film and television productions, including The Duchess, Peaky Blinders, and of course that perennial favourite, Pride and Prejudice. Hello, Sally.
Hello, it's great to be here.
So we have three wonderful guests. We've got an event which is going to take approximately an hour. And towards the end of that time, we'll be taking your questions. And you can begin by submitting those questions now. And underneath the video screen, you should see a button that says Q&A, where you can enter your name and your question. And I'll try to get to as many of those as I possibly can towards the end of this session. The other thing to be aware of is, of course, the chat function, again, at the bottom of the screen. So watch that for links to World Monuments Fund, to Chatsworth and to other places, and how you can support us, which I think is clearly very important to all of us. I'm going to start then with a question for Julie and Nell, and that is that you have both worked in a wide variety of historic houses, both in front of the camera and behind it. So perhaps, it's one of those probably very difficult questions, but also easy. And that is, which has been your favourite and why? Julie, let's start with you.
I would say my favourite place to shoot was Castle Howard. And that was for a variety of reasons. We used to visit that house when I was younger. And so it has a sentimental attachment to me. And then when I read the script, which was episode 6 of Bridgerton, I just knew that it was the perfect location for the Duke's father, who was a sinister figure, kind of looming, scary presence. And one of the reasons why it was my favorite place to shoot was because we spent over 2 weeks there, which is quite unusual. And we got to know every aspect of the house. We got to know the people that worked there really well, and it was a fantastic experience.
And I think that clearly shows in the productions that you made from it. Nell, how about you?
I would have to say Harewood House is my favourite. We filmed there a great deal shooting Victoria, and because of that, I became quite familiar with it, and it just kind of started to feel like home from home, really. And we got to know the staff a fair bit and have a good relationship with them. Also, what people might not know is that a lot of filming is waiting. You're waiting around quite a lot. So Harewood House actually has a vast plethora of activities for the public when it's open to the public. And I found myself, when I was waiting around between scenes, enjoying these activities. So I would go and I'd walk around the bird garden where you can see all these beautiful tropical birds. I'd be off climbing trees, much to the annoyance of the costume department. And even I once went in the adventure playground in full Victorian maid garb. And I went on the zip wire, and I suddenly realized halfway through the sky that I might be caught in the back of a shot, and there would just be this really bizarre Victorian maid swinging through the air in the back of a shot. But it was one of the reasons that I loved Harewood House.
I have to say that that's an image which we'd love to capture somewhere. That would be just
only.
wonderful. If only. Okay, so our first kind of set of questions is really about why do we film in historic houses? And I think it's particularly relevant in a world where technological advances mean that we can create not just houses, but indeed whole planets through CGI, or we can build highly accurate sets in studios. So why do we keep on coming back to filming in these places? Julie, perhaps we can start with you on that one.
There's nothing like shooting in a historic house, and believe it or not, we even have those out here in Los Angeles, although they wouldn't be historic by UK standards. It's absolutely wonderful out here to shoot at a place where, you know, Charlie Chaplin used to eat. There's a place called Musso and Frank's out here where I've shot. And then in the UK, you could never build these houses. It's not practical to build them, even in CGI terms, to build them if you want to go back and keep using them frequently. So that's my reasoning. There's an atmosphere that's captured, and it invigorates the actors. I think now, do you agree?
Definitely, absolutely. There's just nothing like the real thing for us actors, having to, you know, make believe that you are wherever you are and you're in whatever time the period drama is set in, when you've got, you know, a lighting guy just there and sound crew and cameras in your face. The bonus of actually being in a real historical place just helps transport you there for sure.
So it's, in a way, it's a bit like a kind of an aid to method acting. You can get yourself really into character by being in the place.
Absolutely. That is kind of the main challenge with playing a period character, is bridging that gap between how we today behave and interact and how people back then would have behaved and interact. It's just that little bit further of a distance to go when you're playing a character. And, you know, as much as costume helps with that, there is a tiny part of your brain that is aware this costume looks like a period costume, but in fact it was made for me, it's new. And location is, there's no artifice, it's the real deal. There's that specific smell that you get in old houses of the stone floors and the polished wood, and it's just so evocative and so useful for really transitioning into that time period.
So it really helps the actors as well as the set production. Okay, so I guess the ability for houses to transport viewers to a different period is clearly a huge attraction. But there are times when they need to be molded to create the perfect set. So, Julie, how exactly do you make sure that the real life locations used in Bridgerton portray the fictional locations that are in the script?
Well, with Bridgerton specifically, we really wanted a fairy tale world. And it's interesting, there's actually not very much of Regency England left. And we scoured the UK looking for Grosvenor Square, because obviously we couldn't use the real Grosvenor Square because it's like a traffic jam most of the time. And so we were scouring, and then one day the production designer and I were standing in the middle of a Regency Square in Bristol, and we looked at each other and we just thought, this isn't the fairy tale that we want. So what we decided to do was to create Grosvenor Square in post-production. So we combined two houses. One was the Ranger's house in Blackheath, which I used to live next door to. Oh, there it is. I used to live next door to that when I was living in England and walked past it every day. So we combined that house, which is a very warm, inviting, welcoming house, with this is the museum on the Royal Crescent in Bath as the Featherington home. You can see it's kind of cold and foreboding. So we placed these houses opposite each other and we built in CGI the square. And the logistics of doing this is really complicated. You have to get the continuity exactly right between the two houses, both in terms of time of day and then in terms of shooting. In terms of if you're going to shoot across something towards the other house, you have to transport all of the props, everything to each location. They're very far apart. And then in terms of creating the square itself, we had to do a drone shot, which was shot from the correct altitude and angle to be able to build the whole square in post.
So, I mean, it doesn't bear thinking about, but we think about continuity in the sense that you have continuity of actors in a particular scene, but here you have to have continuity between different properties and a CGI property. It sounds incredibly complicated.
Yeah, it is scary. I always think that directing is a bit like putting together a jigsaw puzzle, and you always are worried that there's going to be a key piece of that jigsaw puzzle missing when you get in post. That's why I do a lot of previs. I do a lot of storyboarding, especially when you're creating this romantic landscape that is a little bit hyper real.
Fantastic. Well, we've heard a little bit then about how historic houses can be, how important they are for films and television shows. And indeed, what I'm hearing is that actually a lot of the time there's nothing better than the real thing, which is music to my ears as a heritage conservation person. Now, perhaps we can move on to talk about your experiences during filming. Nell, I know that you've worked at Wentworth Woodhouse, which coincidentally is a World Monuments watch site from 2016, so one that we've supported. And of course, you've already mentioned Harewood House in Yorkshire many times. Does it feel a little bit like going back to a second home to go to these places so frequently?
Yeah, for sure. It definitely does. It's funny with Wentworth, I had such a different experience working there on Victoria, and then another show that I did called The Irregulars, which has just come out on Netflix just on Friday. On Victoria, I obviously played a maid, and my experience of working at Wentworth was kind of in the outbuildings and the stables, transforming those outbuildings into sort of a really Dickensian, grimy version of London. And then in The Irregulars, I actually play a princess. So I got to film in the beautiful big part of the house. But Wentworth's a funny one because I once went exploring around the house. I had some time to kill and I said, can I have a bit of a wander around the house? And the custodians very kindly said, yeah, go ahead. And I found this room that was purely made up like a child's bedroom, like perfectly all preserved, like the Marie Celeste, like toys and a quilt on the bed and everything was sort of perfect, whereas all the other rooms were quite dilapidated and disused. And I went back to the custodian and said, has someone else been filming here? Because there's a room that's sort of perfectly all made up. And they said, no. And I was like, oh my goodness, it's a ghost. It seemed like the most hauntedly perfect room. So yeah, Wentworth House definitely has a slightly sort of maybe spirity vibe, for want of a better phrase.
Well, I should say, Nell, congratulations on your elevation to princess. I think that's you're very welcome. And I guess a kind of follow-up question from that is that these houses can tell both the upstairs story and the downstairs story. Do you find there's any kind of difference in terms of how you behave? Does the house kind of evoke a different acting style? How does that work?
For sure, it definitely does. Even when you're in the costume of a princess with your sort of beautiful big gown, I found myself carrying myself taller and sort of feeling that confidence from within. But what was really strange was that the crews on these shows who knew me as Nell out of costume treat you differently when you're in a sort of low status costume versus being in a high status costume. So funnily enough, in Victoria, even though my character was much more regularly featured in the show, because I played a maid, you know, there's this sort of casualness of like, oh, hey, Nell, there's Nell, whatever. And then on The Irregulars, I'm playing a princess, and I wasn't in the show that much, but I just sort of had this sort of hushed awe wherever I went, because people sort of felt that I somehow was a princess. It definitely kind of infected even the modern day mood of the crew and how they treated me.
And that's a sign of good acting as well.
Oh, thank you.
That's a sign of good acting.
I hope so.
And Julie, just picking up on the point that the same house can look different on film depending on the director's choices. So lots of the locations in Bridgerton, for example, have been seen on screen before. So I'm thinking particularly of Wilton House, which appeared in The Crown as Buckingham Palace. How do you make Wilton House fit the tone of Bridgerton?
I know, when we were talking about this yesterday, you were shocked to hear that I had never watched The Crown. And I was not really aware of how extensively Wilton House had been used as Buckingham Palace when I chose it as a key location for Bridgerton. However, since I did watch The Crown after coming back and after editing, and I was really surprised, and I realized that you wouldn't necessarily know that it was the same location because the styles of the shows are completely different. In Bridgerton, again, we were going for this fairy tale world, slightly heightened reality. I was using very wide lenses. You can see in the picture here, there was Atmos in the air, which I don't think they would ever use in The Crown. So Atmos it feels a bit like smoke, but it's a very, very specific type that won't damage the architecture in any way. So it just feels very different. In The Crown, I saw when they were shooting Buckingham Palace, they tended to use kind of slightly longer lenses and they had more defined shots. Whereas I was hoping to capture the grandeur of the occasion, to place Daphne at the heart of it and the intimidation that she was feeling. So it's kind of how you use the house as well as the house itself.
It sounds like the amount of choices that you have to make. It's not just a case of setting up with a camera and filming someone in a house. There's a whole range of other choices that you have to make as directors and producers to bring this to life, and that's the art of it. Yes,
that is correct. And because you're given only limited timing in these houses, time is money. My experience is you really have to know how you're going to shoot it before you get there, and you have to have made all the key decisions well in advance. And so, yeah.
Okay, so we've heard a little bit about how both of you as actors and the team behind the cameras, we've heard from you about how you would view these historic houses. But what about those whose, I guess, responsibility is actually to look after these places? Sally, you're head of marketing and visitor experience at Chatsworth, which has played host to a wide variety of productions. How do you choose which productions you actually allow to film?
Well, first of all, we absolutely love period dramas. They really bring the house and the garden to life in such a magical, splendid way. And everybody just loves watching the filming where they can, and being extras also, if that's possible. But we do love filming at Chatsworth, and the main thing for us is we will really consider whether we can do it. You know, can we accommodate the film crew, the timings? We do flex as well, but we haven't done anything from a period drama point of view for quite a while, because we were very heavily used in terms of Pemberley for Pride and Prejudice and also for Death Comes to Pemberley. But we do documentaries, we do all sorts of other sort of, factual and drama series too. One of the things that was something I worked on was a large Bollywood film, and that's called Humshackles. And that was quite extraordinary. So the storyline is quite confusing, but also very funny, because it's a comedy, and the three actors that you can see there they have a lookalike, and the lookalike has a lookalike, because Humshackles basically means triples. And it's sort of, it was so exciting and vibrant, but it was rather challenging at times when the helicopters, which is always sort of the opening scene in some of the films, there were two of them who were doing what I can only describe as the equivalent of handbrake turns as they landed close to the front of the house, at which point I just had to say, stop now, too many times, scaring the sheep, enough now, I think you've got it. But other than that, it was fantastic.
I take it the house wasn't open to visitors at that point in time.
It was.
It was.
It was. I was stood on the end of the Emperor Lake, so not Emperor Lake, at the canal pond by the Emperor Fountain, stopping visitors from walking into what could have been a really low flying zone as the helicopters came in really low. And everybody was just fascinated by it. But I think they did fly over a few too many times.
And of course, the shooting is not always about the house itself. These estates are made up of extensive land and beautiful landscapes that can be used in all manners of types of production. So, Sally, I assume Chatsworth's been used in that way as well.
Yes, absolutely. We had the James Bond Lotus Esprit, which was a submarine car, and that was from the 1977 The Spy Who Loved Me. And that came and drove down our main drive because it doesn't have a road license and it was filmed for Top Gear. And also we use our quarry. So the estate has several quarries, and this one, Eldon Quarry, is near Buxton. And you'll see a setup here, which is being filmed for Apple TV for a science fiction production, of which I am not allowed to talk about at the moment, but it will be out soon.
Well, it's great that you welcome such a wide range of films and television shows. But how do you manage productions like this, particularly when we know that you receive literally hundreds of thousands of visitors every year? And let's not forget, it's still the home of the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire and their family. How do you balance that?
It is quite tricky to balance, but we do have times of the year when we're not open to the public in the house and in the garden. So those are opportune moments. We would never close down everything, I'm sure, but you never know. But I wouldn't have envisaged we would, because we want to be open for visitors. The other things are we film through the night. So, of course, we have to check with the family, because if they're around, and it's not going to be good fun for them if they're in the house and we were filming the Bollywood film with lots of dance scenes and music, and it would have been pretty loud for them in the house overnight. So we can do that, but also there are so many other areas around the estate that we can use, and not always focus, like you say, just on the house.
Okay.
Yeah. Just to jump in, I remember one of my favourite scenes we ever shot was actually in the grounds of Harewood, I think, and we shot on a boat on the lake, and it's this beautiful landscape. I think it was designed by Capability Brown, and it was just so picturesque. And we filmed on this tiny little rowboat, and then we had a picnic by the side of the lake with parasols and strawberries and cream, and I was basically in a dream because it was just so beautiful.
I guess with historic houses, you've got that, as I say, wonderful mix of upstairs, great palatial rooms and elegance, downstairs where the work happens. You've got the estate with Capability Brown, you've got quarries. There's such variety for filmmakers to actually use. So I'm going to move on now because with working with these historic buildings, there must be a kind of weight of responsibility, particularly for filmmakers coming into these very precious buildings with their precious contents. And so you must always, Julie, I'm thinking particularly of you, be concerned that something in the house might get damaged or broken. And therefore you too have to balance between making the film and actually acknowledging the house has to look after its property. And I know that there was some not tension, but I guess, maybe a bit of tension at Castle Howard when you were filming particular scenes.
Yeah, Sally, it's so great to get your perspective on it. Yes, Castle Howard is fairly well known, I guess, now for the bedroom scenes in Bridgerton. And when we're shooting those scenes, on set anyway, there's a rule, as Nell will know, of it being a closed set. So everybody who is superfluous to the scene has to leave, and all the monitors are closed down, and only absolutely essential personnel remain in the rooms. And you see Reggae there in the bed that's actually in Castle Howard. And so the room monitors I was so surprised, would not leave the room. And I was saying, but this is a closed set. But yes, it might be a closed set, but we can't let you stay in the room alone to potentially damage the room. So that was a bit of a learning process for all of us. And there was one particular point when Reggae was getting carried away on one of the historic beds, and the room monitor had to go up to him and say, could you take it easy on the bedposts, please? So, and so that was, there is the very bed.
Sally, I know you've got similar experience.
Absolutely. It's quite interesting listening to it from that side, because we did have some filming of a love scene, and I did ask my colleague what the love scene was, and here you see Tommy Shelby and May from Peaky Blinders in series 2. So I did ask about this love scene, and we did a little bit of sort of tweaking. But having said that, when it was actually being filmed, it was filmed when the house was open, but the Regency guest bedrooms were closed, which is where the filming was taking place. And my colleague Steph, and the room monitor was called Ellen at the time, and this is the room. We had to remove the bedding. We had to remove everything on top of the desk, and they bought things for the desk because they swept it upwards rather than sweeping it downwards so that it didn't break anything. It was very passionate. There was a bit of sort of, bumping into things and throwing May on the bed. But the bed actually had a foam piece, not the original mattress, with 2 channels that were cut out at the headboard and at the foot, so that they didn't actually touch the silk on the headboard or on the bottom of the foot place at the bottom of the bed, in case they were going to rip it. And the room monitor, Ellen at the time, had to sit there at a certain level and make sure that everything was as it should be. And my colleague Steph did tell me when they were in there, it was quite something, because it happened about 6 or 7 times, if not longer, over a period of about 3 to 4 hours. And Tommy Shelby had to do press-ups outside the room to get himself all sort of out of breath and pumped up, was then sprayed with water to make him look like he was sweaty and even more sexy than he looks normally. And in he went, in their paper, what she described as baking sort of paper pants and nothing else. And they filled the room with Atmos. And you could hear, you could hear the director speaking and giving direction, because music was played over the scene. So it was absolutely fascinating. But in hindsight, we probably might have done that a different time in the day.
I might add, it's reassuring as an actor to hear that if there is a room monitor in the room when doing a love scene, they're not looking at you, they're just looking at the set, the bed, the soft furnishings, just making sure everything's fine. You don't even need to worry about being looked at. It's all good.
Different perspective on things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not interested.
Of course, inevitably things are going to go wrong. So, I mean, in your experience, both Julie and Nell, are there any occasions when you've either got very, very nervous or things have gone wrong?
I'll just dive in here. I would say the crews are very respectful of the houses in general. There was a moment when we were shooting in the assembly rooms at Bath, and I don't know if this is actually true or not, but we were told that the chandeliers in the ballroom were worth £5 million each. And I'd asked for these chandeliers to be lowered so that they could be part of the sequence and we could shoot across them. We had a Technicrane in that room, and the Technicrane was swooping down very, very close to these chandeliers. Now, I had total trust and faith in the Technicrane operator because he's a very long time collaborator of mine, and I know how good he is. But still, when I saw the crane moving past literally an inch from the chandelier down to the dancers below, I did have a difficult moment.
I'm sure. How about you, Nell?
I mean, we're always so careful. It's a very sort of respectful process filming in these places. It is slightly worrying when you're in period costume and often you have really big skirts, your spatial awareness completely changes because you're suddenly taking up more space than you're used to taking up, and you can sort of spin round to reach for your water bottle or something and find that your skirts have kind of swayed a thing that you haven't been aware of. But nothing's ever gone wrong. The closest thing that we had to going wrong was in the first series of Victoria, there was a storyline where Buckingham Palace became infested by rats, which did in fact happen. And we had 20 live rats on set, which wasn't fun for me. I'm not a fan. And they were on set, and then the animal handler rounded them up at the end and he only counted 19. And there was a horrible half an hour where we couldn't find the missing rat, which was a bit tense.
But you found it. You found it in the end.
We did in the end. We did in the end.
Thank goodness.
So
Thank
no harm
goodness.
done to the rat either. No
Excellent.
rats were harmed.
Another challenge that can arise after the release of a television show or a film is that a house becomes associated with a successful production, and you often see a huge increase in visitor numbers which follow. So, Sally, how's Chatsworth dealt with that in the past? Because it must have happened.
Yes, absolutely. In 2005, with Pride and Prejudice, there were a lot of people who came on the back of the film. And of course, film tourism is so popular, and people still visit Chatsworth today. Some of them dressed as Lizzie Bennet, some of them just wanting to be in the spot where she stood. And it is fantastic that it still, continues today, but it's because it's such a classic, in terms of Jane Austen's book, that it will continue, I think, just forever being part of Pemberley at Chatsworth. We've had lots of visitors turn up because of a documentary series we had in 2012. And for that, actually, it was wonderful because it reached audiences who perhaps wouldn't have come to Chatsworth before, and they perhaps weren't aware of necessarily how to engage in asking people about a certain work of art. They may have felt lacking in confidence in certain things, and perhaps that television documentary really enabled them to come and visit and to have a conversation, whether it was about the tablecloth, that would constantly needed to be kept, pristine and iron smooth, etc., or the laying of the table. And it just gave them a way in to have fantastic conversations. The other thing that is quite entertaining, and this is the Mr. Darcy bust that we, at the time, John Oliver, who is what was called the comptroller then, he got it signed in the contract that we would be able to have the bust after the filming. And literally, it does sit now in the Orangery gift shop at the end of the house with "Please do not kiss" sign, as you see on the screen, because people do kiss Mr. Darcy in the Orangery.
Well, I can take
Maybe COVID will put an end to that.
Indeed, I'm sure it will have done. I can take your Mr. Darcy, Sally, and I can raise you one, because in a previous life, I used to work for the National Trust in the Northwest, and just across the Peak District from Chatsworth is Lyme Park. Lyme Park was actually Pemberley in the television series Pride and Prejudice, the one with Jennifer Earle and Colin Firth. And there you can see the property making the very most of the fact that Colin Firth emerged from the lake virtually shirtless. The thing about Lyme Park is that when the television show came out, the visitor numbers went from something like 33,000 to over 90,000. So it can have that kind of impact. At Lyme, as I'm sure at Chatsworth, those properties can deal with it because they are big enough. Lyme itself was a party house. I think it's more problematic when you have a very small property. And the one which I can think of is Hilltop in the Lake District, which is Beatrix Potter's house. There you can see it. And it was the focus of a film starring Renée Zellweger. You can see her there, Miss Potter. The thing about Hilltop is that it's small, it's tiny, and it's approached in a little village through tiny narrow lanes. So it already gets 100,000 visitors. If you added on top of that the people who come because of Miss Potter, then you actually create quite a difficult problem. And part of the art of managing these places is actually how you deflect people, how you send people to different places, how you get them to go at different times, or indeed how you manage disappointment. One of the other interesting things about Hilltop it's worth mentioning is that it's a property which is very much loved by the Japanese audience, because many of them of a certain generation learnt English from Beatrix's books. And so I was wondering, Sally, in the same way that Hilltop has those different segments, do you find that different audience segments come to Chatsworth depending on the different productions which are made there?
Yes, absolutely. There's a huge following for Pride and Prejudice, both in the United States, but also in China. And some of that is to do with the sense of romance and the history and the heritage, but some of it also is to do with the fact that it's also on reading lists as well in schools. So they kind of grow up with it. And the Chinese in Mandarin, the translation of Chatsworth actually is Mr. Darcy's house. Which is something that people find quite funny, because actually I think it was very similar for Blenheim as well. It's what they associate it with rather than a literal translation. But we do choose sometimes what we want to have filmed here based on different demographic, different audiences, and trying to appeal to a really broad range of potential visitors, because if we can connect with them, that's the most important thing for us. Now, the Duchess here, there's incredible stories about this as well. I spoke to my predecessor was involved in this one, particularly Simon Seligman, and he said that he actually spent time with Keira Knightley, showing her letters from Georgiana, all the things at the archive, so she could really get a sense of Georgiana's personality and start to really, live the character. And she was very famous at that time, in Pride and Prejudice less so. And there's some wonderful stories, again, about people wanting to have the first photograph of her in her dress with the wig and the hat, looking amazing. And as basically having spotters on the roof trying to stop, journalists and others with cameras, like taking photos and selling it. The security was intense, I believe.
Yep, I have a story about that as well. When we were shooting in Bath, there was it was very strictly locked down in terms of the photographs that you could take that would give away any location. But people did take pictures of, a pavement or a wall and posted them to social media. And there were, in Brazil, there's a huge fan base for the Bridgerton series. And people were flying in from Brazil to come and watch the shoot, because they managed to kind of geolocate where we were and just flew, just got on the next plane and came. And it was just, I've never experienced anything like that.
So it's fascinating, isn't it, in the way that film and television actually opens up these new audiences in different parts of the world, but you can't possibly imagine how those connections are made, but they are made. So it's a wonderful vehicle, a medium for, I suppose, engaging with heritage.
I took a picture of a carpet once in Hackney Empire, and somehow they matched it with my assistant's picture of the same carpet, and they figured out it was the Hackney Empire. I mean, it was just, wow. It's like detective work.
You just never know what's going to happen, do you? You really don't. Okay, so TV shows and films gain a sense of authenticity and grandeur from filming in historic houses, but there's also the benefit that we're sort of touching on at the moment from being featured on the screen. Sally, could you tell me what ways in which Chatsworth has benefited from being such a popular location for film and television?
Film tourism for us is huge in terms of Pride and Prejudice, and I think that's great because it's also really good for the local visitor economy, and the amount of people who do, you'll know, John, the Pride and Prejudice tours, they probably come to Chatsworth and go to Lyme because they're so close together in geography. The other thing that filming does for us, as well as reaching more people, audiences, and increasing the awareness of how beautiful the landscape and the house is, and what a visit could be like. It's also the fact that there is some income on some of the filming that we take part in, not all of it, but some of them, yes. And the films tend to be more lucrative, in terms of, income for the Chatsworth House Trust. And the Chatsworth House Trust has a really long list of projects for conservation, restoration, and basically it's endless. So all the money that goes into the Chatsworth House Trust is basically spent on preserving Chatsworth for future generations. But as I say, those are the main reasons why we do it, apart from the fact we love it. And sometimes it's fun and exciting, especially in period dramas.
I'd say almost always. From us looking outside, looking in, for definite. I also think there's something really interesting about what we can learn from people who make television and who make films, as really them being master storytellers. And I recall we worked on there was a production called The Mill, which was based at Quarrybank Mill, another National Trust property in northwest England, which was all about a 19th century mill and the workers and the mill owners. And apart from creating a completely fabricated graveyard, which was made out of foam gravestones, and a completely new building, one of the things which I was fascinated was how they retained or created the magic of a place so that it looked early 19th century. So one of the things they did was to put down on a tarmac road, which wouldn't be 19th century, they put down sort of carpets of fake cobbles and sets and covered it with horse and cow manure. And actually the sense of loss when that fake cobbles went was really palpable. So it gets you to think about different ways of interpreting and ensuring the magic of historic houses is truly retained. I'm going to move to some broader discussion now before opening it up to the floor. And one of the things about World Monuments Fund is that our goal is to show people that heritage isn't just about bricks and mortar, but is in fact part of a wider conversation about culture. These buildings are extraordinary examples of history and architecture. And indeed, I believe that they're works of art in themselves. And the popularity of period dramas shows how heritage has a much wider appeal than one might think. These places are not just for academic history buffs or people who collect historic houses. The period dramas show us that there's a whole world of people who are fascinated by these. Now, many of your most popular roles have been in period dramas. Why do you think fans are so obsessed, so interested in acting out stories from the past?
I think a big part of it, and I say this as well as a fan of period dramas, is escapism. It's a wonderful, sumptuous world that we can completely lose ourselves in. And I think that, especially this past year, has been a really important thing for people. And I do also think that it is just a really human way to connect with history. And I think that people sort of need that because it creates a sense of, humanity that is a consistent thread throughout all of time. Love is love and jealousy is jealousy, and all those emotions that people feel, we've always felt. And I think that that's a sort of really beautiful and important thing that we are reminded of through period dramas.
Fantastic. And would you say that acting in period dramas and visiting these places, that's made you more interested in heritage and history?
For sure, definitely. You can't help but sort of dive in completely into the history of places where you visit to film, and it's such an honor and privilege that it's part of my job that I get to go to these incredible places that I otherwise might not get to. And also, as I was saying, I'm a fan of so many things. So the photo that's currently on the screen is Castle Doon in Scotland, which in Outlander is Castle Leoch, which I knew as the set of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which I was obsessed with as a child. So I was really fangirling Monty Python when I was there.
That's wonderful, wonderful. Julie, Bridgerton has been an amazing success, and it reached #1 in a whole range of countries across the world. Why do you think that show resonated with so many people?
I think the thing that Shonda does particularly well is the human relationships. There is a character for everyone on that screen. Everybody can identify with one of the characters on that screen, that ensemble. And something that we really try to do in terms of casting, something that we were really thinking about was this relatability. So Phoebe, particularly Phoebe Dynevor, who plays Daphne, she is a porcelain beauty. Here she is on the screen, but she has a very relatable quality about her. She's a very modern, kind of down-to-earth, relatable person inside this gorgeous face, and that relatability is something that we really were striving for in terms of the casting.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think the thing about Bridgerton was relevance. It just felt at the right time, totally relevant to where we are now, and I thought that was very strong actually in that particular show. We are now approaching, we've got a quarter of an hour to go. So I just wanted to kind of wrap up this session by saying that I'm sure that you've loved hearing the stories and seeing the behind the scenes scenes from all these amazing productions. And they're really a testament to how the film industry and the heritage sector are often serving the same goal. And that is, as I've said before, telling stories that entertain and capture the imagination and therefore make people engage and feel close to and care about heritage. World Monuments Fund is a champion for heritage, both in its conservation and in showing people how engaging heritage can be. What's more, our work doesn't only focus on stately homes in the UK, which my team are particularly involved in, but we also work on projects across the world involving local communities in the restoration of sites of historical and cultural significance. And I just wanted to add that at this stage, just this last weekend, we in the UK have, with our partners in New York, have completed 2 UK government funded projects, one to restore the National Museum in Taiz in Yemen. And you can imagine that's no mean feat considering the ongoing conflict that's taking place there and indeed the impact of coronavirus. And then the second project, which literally just concluded on Sunday, was the graduation of 43 students in Tripoli in Lebanon, where we've been training them to become conservation stonemasons. These students are both Syrian refugees and local Lebanese. And the idea of the project is that you give people the skills to restore the war-damaged heritage of the region. And most importantly, at the same time, you essentially you help find them employment and livelihoods and indeed hope. And as you can see, these pictures, I think, can paint 1,000 words. But what I think also is entirely relevant is that moving pictures, the very thing that we've been talking about, can treble, quadruple that. Millions of words can be essentially told through the moving image. So I was wondering, particularly for Julie, do you think there's a role for filmmakers in telling these kinds of stories? Is that something that we can do?
Well, I mean, that's a question for you. I mean, I'm fascinated by this. I think it's I was blown away when I heard of the work that you're doing, particularly as somebody who's toured refugee camps, and the things that always come out of those tours are people want work and they want to educate their children. And so you're providing such a key kind of component of the meaning of existence, really. So, I think we as filmmakers should stand with the World Monument Fund and just do, work with you however it's useful.
Well, as Julie knows, I will definitely be in touch with her after this particular programme to take up that offer. Right, we have a little bit of time to go to the Q&A, which you've been posting. So I'm going to pick out a number of these. And the first one is perhaps one for you, Julie, since you're there. How much time does it take in preparing these sets before they begin filming, especially with Bridgerton, since it looks like a very large-scale project? So how much time, and does it take a lot of preparation?
That's a good question. And I would say it depends. So the interiors were built. That obviously took many months. But in a place like Castle Howard, I guess it depends on the level of work. So if we are taking up some of the massive carpets in the rooms, which we did, and refinishing the floors, which we did in several locations, that's obviously a number of weeks' work, but it's always a financial decision. Because as Sally knows, if you buy out a house or a part of a house, in order to do work that you need for filming, that costs money. So it's a constantly constantly juggling the finances versus the ambition. So there's no one size fits all. Sometimes it's just a matter of days, depending on the amount of work that there is to be done. And then sometimes, as I say, when you have a large amount of work to do and a lot of furniture to move, it can take weeks.
Okay, thank you, Julie. And I've got a similar question from Rita in Budapest. And this is for Nell, and that is, Nell, do you research about the historic period or about the character that you're about to play, or do they just tell you how to behave?
No, I do research. I read for Victoria, for example, I read a really useful book called Serving Victoria, which was actually a collection of diary entries by various members of the Buckingham Palace staff that worked for Queen Victoria, which was literally the most invaluable primary source for the part that I was playing. So that contained diary entries from, I think there was a butler who was writing diaries at the time, and then there was one of the governesses for the children, and it just provided this incredibly rich tapestry of sort of all the different downstairs elements of the house. So yeah, I tend to try and be quite thorough, because you never know what you'll stumble upon. You might find out a tiny little detail that you can sort of hook onto and incorporate that into your character's inner life.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. I've got a question now for Sally. Sally, this is, do you feel that the story of Pride and Prejudice has become a part of the history of Chatsworth, and will it continue to be?
It's an interesting question. If you come to Chatsworth, you do feel as though, if you are a Jane Austen and a Pride and Prejudice fan, that you are at Pemberley. However, there are those who really, it completely passes them by, and it is Chatsworth. So it's one element. People have lots of different reasons for coming to Chatsworth, and everybody has their own version of it. And for those that love Pride and Prejudice and Jane Austen, wonderful.
And I would say that from the perspective of Lyme Park, which acted as Pemberley, we've got to think of these historic houses as actors themselves. That's definitely part of the history of that place. It's kind of imbued in it. So I think, yeah, the answer is yes, in a positive way, but also learning from the practical reality of what filming means. I've got another one for Julie, and that is, would you geolocate a scene in a wrong site for practical financial reasons, i.e. using an English house for a French house? Does this throw up any specific problems? That sounds quite technical.
Yes. I mean, we do it all the time. So you will shoot, I mean, I've shot Austin for LA. I've shot Pittsburgh for New Jersey. I've shot, it goes on and on. You're always doubling. And again, I hate to come back to this. It's usually for a financial reason. It depends on where the tax breaks are. I know Prague is used a lot. So yes, is the simple and straightforward answer to that. Okay.
And another one for Nell, which is, Nell, as an actor, how do you prepare for the role in terms of dressing, etc.? So I think it's quite a practical one. I say, are there trailers near the house? Do you have to go far from the filming site after the shoot? What facilities are there for food and drink? So I guess the practicalities, how does that feel when you're in period dramas?
I just wanted to say on the last question, we cheated a house, Harloxton Manor. Is it called Manor? Harloxton House. One of the photos in the slides was Harloxton House for France. And what was so strange was that the house felt like France. So I think those cheap locations, it's often because the atmosphere there feels so correct. And the week that we spent there, I felt like I was on holiday in France. But to answer the costume question, I pride myself on being so adept with a corset now. I can do up my own corset and lace it and unlace it all behind my back because I've done so much period drama. So the costume girls normally at the end of the day come into your trailer and like de-rig you out of all these layers and the crinolines and all that stuff, and I can now do it like this. So I'm very proud of that fact. I can get myself dressed and undressed in period garb.
A transferable life skill, I think now that's called.
I know, like if I stopped acting, they'd love me in the bank. I'd be so useful.
Just to chime in, there's usually a small city almost called a base camp, which is parked usually within walking distance of the house, and that's where all the.
And sometimes when we're filming like outside in the woods or something, you just have a little prop-up tent or pagoda where you have to do all your changing sort of just in a little tent. But they always bring it to you. They make it easy for us actors.
Sally, last question for you, then we're going to wrap up. But I've got one question for you all. But Sally, one for you is: are there any particular rooms not open to the public that you are not allowed to be filmed in?
That's quite a tricky question because it depends what it is. But where the family live, I wouldn't ask because it's their home, essentially. And there are so many other rooms in the house anyway that are absolutely spectacular. So I'm sure we could accommodate whatever it was. And actually, I think there was a comment made about the size and scale of rooms. We're really fortunate at Chatsworth to have some pretty large rooms. So from a filming perspective, I think we probably have interiors that would fit the bill anyway, without even looking in terms of rooms that others perhaps wouldn't see.
Thank you, Sally. And one question which none of you may be able to answer, and that is, have you anything in the pipeline in terms of period dramas which you can tell us about? Julie's saying no.
I can't, no.
Okay, I'd ask that question.
My only thing in the pipeline is Texas Chainsaw Massacre, so that's not at all a period drama.
That's for sure. I have to wrap up now, and to be honest, we could be talking for another couple of hours, or we could run this over another few sessions without any question of a doubt. It's been absolutely fascinating. So I have to say my thanks have to go to Julianne Robinson, to Nell Hudson and Sally Ambrose for your brilliant insight in today's event, and of course to Intelligence Squared for their help in putting it all together. So thank you for that. Thank you. Much applause to all three of you.
Thank you.
And just to kind of wrap up finally, if you'd like to know more about World Monuments Fund, indeed, if you'd like to support us and you'd like to support places like Chatsworth, please do visit our website. Do go to the chat. Hopefully there are some links there, and follow us. We need your support in terms of making sure that these magnificent buildings continue to be magnificent in the future, and continue indeed to be at the heart of the local communities that live, visit and work in and around them. So that's really important to us and hopefully to you. So please join us, sign up to our newsletter, donate if you wish to. That would all be greatly appreciated. If you're interested in our future events, again, look at the website. But our next event coming up is that we're running here is about Pemberley Viaduct, which is magnificent Victorian viaduct, which spans actually the border from Derbyshire into Nottinghamshire in the Northern English Midlands. And there we're going to be joined by another wonderful panel who can talk about how you preserve these kind of industrial monuments, and also how you can make sure that they're relevant for the local community in perpetuity. So do join us for that. It just remains for me to say, once again, thank you very much to our wonderful panelists. Thank you everyone else for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll see you again at another event. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.